So after the crash, I had nothing else to do but assess the damage and make a list of what I needed to repair. You can see from this photo that my forks were bent again. Annoyingly, the whole triple tree got bent because I wasn't using a proper fork brace at the time. So the forces got transferred further up the fork. My handlebars folded like a taco, and obviously my petrol tank was also now scrap metal. This was getting a little bit ridiculous. I was on my 4th petrol tank. I guess I had nothing else to do but go on eBay and buy the cheapest petrol tank I could find for 130 quid. Back to the drawing board a little bit. I looked at some inspiration. I didn't want to paint it the same color. I originally wanted it to make it British racing green, like this Steve McQueen's bike. I just really like that yellowish dark green tone. I updated my drawing, then found a new painter. This time I didn't screw around too much. I just picked some color samples and told him to spray it, and he did an amazing job. Honestly, I think this was one of the best paint jobs anybody's done on any part that I've had commissioned. Depending on how the light would hit the paint job, it would either be dark blue or yellowish green, and sometimes black in the shade. You can see I've rebuilt the forks, and my exhaust was also scratched annoyingly. This was my 3rd attempt at improving my seat. I saw this example at a bike shop, and I liked the bead that goes round, this sort of bench style, flat, simple seat. I used this as inspiration, made some drawings again. And luckily Triumph has lots of aftermarket parts. I bought this seat pan from Motone, which also comes with the foam, but it didn't quite have the right shape. I wanted it to go flat rather than have this dip in here. This might also be a good time to show that when I crashed, my brake master cylinder broke again, so that seemed like another weak point. So I bought a brake master cylinder from a different series of Bonnevilles that would work with my bike as well, but you can see that the actual reservoir is enclosed in the molding, so there was less chance of it being damaged and me losing my brakes in the middle of nowhere. Here's the picture they sent me of the seat being complete, but if you look closely here, you'll see that they put the joining stitch on the back of the bike rather than on the front where it wouldn't be seen. I don't really know why they did that. I ended up asking them to redo it, but I'll get to that in a second. Side stand. I knew that putting the bike on its side stand anywhere in the sand or loose gravel would need a bigger platform. Plus also the chunkier tires made it lean over too much, so the side stand needed to be extended. You can see that the end is actually really skinny. I mocked up some drawings again for the fabricator, and I tried to make it as easy for him to follow my instructions. I wrote where to cut the side stand, how long to extend it by, and made a template for the plate. When I got it back, he welded the plate backwards. So again, I had to go back to him and ask him to redo it, but I'll show you what that looks like a little bit later on. By this point, it was the middle of the summer of 2022, and I was already behind schedule. I was hoping to leave around this time to enjoy the nice weather throughout Europe, and then I had to move again. Luckily, I found another guardianship, which allowed me to make a temporary workshop on the ground floor, which was this pub. It was actually a 6-space. We literally had a pub bar. So it's both fun and functional. Of course, we stocked up the drinks a little bit behind the bar and spent a bit of time bringing it back into a comfy pub-like living space. And then I had my workshop space in the living room. Again, that meant I didn't have to have a separate garage space. As soon as I was done working, I could continue fixing my bike. I mentioned that my handlebars snapped very easily, so I knew I needed to do something about that. I saw this image from Tin Shack Customs on Instagram that had a classic looking shape to the handlebars with a arched brace. I wanted to replicate that for my build. I actually found a replica handlebar exactly like this from Ace Classics, but it was tiny. It works on these older, smaller engine bikes, but on a modern bike, it didn't really work. So I bought another set of the same handlebars that I had before, but decided to just add a brace to it. You can see here I mocked up a steel tube that I just bent, and I tried to find the right location for it. I took it to the same fabricator that spray painted my tank. I'll show you what that looks like in a second. But another thing that didn't work on the bike and failed when I crashed was my phone mount. Because it was only magnetic, in the crash my phone flew off, and that was a fairly big concern because if I dropped the bike or fall off it, my phone could fly into the distance and I'd be completely lost without it. So I went back and looked at all the different companies that provide phone mounts, and I ended up going with SP Connect. And essentially this is what it looked like. I'd always mount my phone sideways and I had a cable coming out, which in practice also didn't work perfectly because water would go into the charging port and I would upgrade to a wireless charger, but this will happen much later in the trip. Here are the handlebars welded. I didn't actually bother to get them fully chrome, so I just left this black paint on there. Also, I mentioned that my forks got twisted because I didn't have a proper fork brace in place. All I had were these brackets that were holding my new mudguard, and I figured that's not enough to add structural rigidity to the potential bending forces that come from the wheel turning when you come off. So I mocked up a template for a new brace. And again, at this point, I didn't have a lot of time and I was getting quite impatient, so I was outsourcing most of this work to somebody else. The same fabricator that did my previous modifications also made the brace, but I didn't realize he was going to make it so thin. I guess it was my fault. I didn't really explain very well that I needed it to be structural. So instead of 1.5 mil, he went back and remade it in thick steel. He actually made it out of 2 parts and welded it in the middle here with a little section. And if you remember in my previous video, I said that I had the power commander removed, which actually partly caused the accident. The bike ran like and needed some proper adjustment. Before I could do that, I needed to fix the scratched exhaust tips. Since they were getting recut and remade, I asked Tom to also add some more baffling because the exhaust was way too loud. It was almost a straight through exhaust, which was great for getting the gases out of the engine, but not really great for my ears, especially if I was going to cover a lot of miles. And this is where the trial and error later on proved to be another mistake. And I'll get to that later, but really we just added too much baffling. Either way, with the modified and fixed exhaust, I found another professional tuner. And my way of finding these specialists were just through Google, which is never actually a very good indication of how good someone is because they didn't do a very good job. Again, I wanted them to create a custom tuning map that would be installed on the ECU rather than using a power commander, but they made the bike run even worse than when I brought it in, and on top of that they killed and drained my really expensive lithium battery, so I had to buy a new battery and I was down 250 quid. I was starting to get frustrated with so-called professionals doing a bit of a hack job and then still charging me money for it, so I started asking for money back. So the tuners actually refunded me half the money, and I also got DynoJet, the owner of Power Commanders, to send me another unit which I just sold on eBay. And after all this, I just decided to tune the bike myself. I rang up Triumph Twin Power, who really are specialists in this field. They told me to buy their map number 12, which costs about 100 quid and comes with the software to install it. All I needed was a USB and a Windows laptop. I loaded the software on there, and this was the best that my bike has run ever since I made any modifications to the exhaust. If I knew this from the start, I would have saved myself probably about £1,000. The bike still wasn't running perfect. Little did I know that it actually had to do with the custom exhaust that we've created that was restrictive, but I will pay the price for that mistake later again in a different video. Here's some more pictures of how I decided to store my spare parts and my luggage. I had some space under the battery, which was occupied with some foam, so I removed that foam and put all my spare parts underneath the battery. You'll see like spark plugs and bolts and spare levers and so on. I also made this L-shaped bracket that protected this space underneath the battery from the chain. And this is where I stored my tool bag. And also I had an air pump that would go in there. I ended up going for a very simple solution for my luggage. I just got these rock straps which went around the frame. And if you don't know rock straps, they have an elastic bungee on one side and a strap with clips on the other. So you can easily pull something really tight, but also the luggage would have a bit of give when you're going over bumps. I was starting to run out of time because I moved my deadline to the end of September. I didn't want to leave and travel through Europe when it's too cold and rainy. These are some of the last minute fixes that I did. I knew again from the crash that the exhaust was exposed to damage when the bike topples on its side. So I added these shock sliders. You can see from this photo that the touch points are here and on the passenger pegs away from the exhaust. And on the front I also had crash mushrooms with these brackets. At some point I managed to drop my bike as well, which taught me that the folding levers don't always necessarily fold. Sometimes they bend and snap, and the weak point was this elbow. So as well as ordering spare parts from Italy that I had to wait 3 weeks for, I made my own spare one, and some silly changes like grinding the key down and making a little graphic on there. That's it, I was ready to test ride the bike. I took it out on a nice sunny day to the south of UK to take some pictures while the bike is the cleanest it's ever been and ever probably will be. You can probably see from this picture I also replaced the Motor Gadget LED lights to a silver one. I know this is silly, but these are just small touches. I sold off the black one. Then the indicators, finally I found these Kellerman bullet indicators, which I think are the smallest indicators you can buy, and the space to mount them away from them ever being snapped off. Here's how the headlight was looking. You can see the side stand is now fixed and the plate welded the right way around. You can probably also see how much longer it's been extended by. I've relocated the rear brake caliper to be above the swing arm rather than below, also to protect that from any damage. Here's a lower view where you can see the bash plate a little bit better. And overall the bike was looking finished. I didn't have much else left to do apart from start packing. I'll briefly walk you through the things that I packed, even though I spent months picking what gear to take with me. I won't go into too much detail. Maybe I'll make another video on what I carry now. I also had a Notion database for the things that I wanted to bring with me. Here's a high-level overview. So I had some motorcycle gear like helmet and goggles and waterproof jacket, armor, gloves, boots, and so on. I had my luggage system, which is a military backpack, motorcycle cover, straps, and all my clothes would go into packing cubes, a couple t-shirts, a couple trousers, 3 pairs of socks, and 3 pairs of underwear. And electronics, I need my laptop because I wanted to keep working remotely, various toiletries, and some other stuff that I carried in my wallet, and obviously documents and tools and spares. Again, Notion was another way of tracking all my spending. If I go into table view, this is how OCD I am. I actually weighed everything to work out how much weight I'm going to carry. And if I go to the bottom here, I have a total which is kind of astronomical. I didn't realize how much I spent on all my gear, but I was still within 20 kilos, which was my aim. If I go up to the top and sort this by price, you can actually see a lot of the spending went into buying the laptop, a helmet that I already had, expensive phone, action camera, boots, and so on. All those things add up. And I didn't take many pictures of my gear because I was itching to just get going. I limited myself to a 35-liter backpack. I really just wanted to bring way less than what I thought I would need, because you can always buy things on the road. Everything was in its sections, so I had all my clothes in one section, accessories in another, electronics, and then I'd also wear my riding gear like the jacket and clothes and boots and so on. And then my laptop had to be in a hard case for obvious reasons. Here's some of those items unpacked. The first thing I did was actually sell my motocross boots, and this was a hard decision. I wasn't sure whether to go with proper boots or just military boots, and I ended up going with the pair of boots that I already had, which are these Dana Arcadia Gore-Tex military boots. And I'm glad I made the right decision because they're just way more versatile. Yes, you sacrifice on protection, but they are waterproof and you can walk around in them all day. I've even went to underground techno raves in them, and nobody really cares because they don't look like motorcycle boots. I needed to make a little adjustment to them. On the left boot, the laces were crushing my toes because of the gear lever digging into the top of the boot. So I added this piece of leather for the gear shifter. I also made some modifications to my helmet. You can see it has these 3 vents at the top, and I knew from riding in the heat that I needed to make my helmet modular and have a peak in hotter conditions and having a visor in cooler conditions. This bit was kind of sketchy, drilling holes in my helmet, adding these threaded rivets. So here's the rivet gun. I also glued the rivets in place so they don't move around because I only had one go to get this to work. The rivets were in place. They just about cleared the visor. Here's the side view. And all this effort was to be able to remove the visor and attach this peak, so I had some shade from direct sunlight. I wanted to also add a bit of comfort and practicality to the helmet, so I bought this Siphon Sound Pro pair of speakers. I looked at all the other brands. I didn't need to connect to other riders. That didn't really bother me. It took a bit of hacking because Hedon doesn't allow for the installation of speakers, but eventually I had them installed. I went through countless pairs of sunglasses and glasses to get the right shades for riding. I even tried to modify my normal sunglasses so that they could be used in different conditions, but eventually I bought some cheap safety goggles that I still use now. If anybody has a perfect solution, let me know, because I still haven't found the perfect riding goggles or glasses. I optimized my toolkit a little bit more. I actually bought another set from Facom that had more Allen attachments and combined the two together to end up with this kit. Here's my hand to scale, and that's it. I really just ran out of time. It was D-Day. It was already end of September, and I've actually agreed to meet some of my family members in Austria in about 5 days' time. So I had to set off. This was it. My bike was kind of 90% ready. I had all my spare parts, my toolkit, all my clothes strapped to the back. Engine wasn't running perfectly, even though I did a tune. My hope was to get it retuned somewhere on the road in Europe. This was my last day living in the pub and essentially moving out of London. And in typical English fashion, it pissed it down with rain all day. The build story ends here. until I make more modifications on the road.